left for the sun. They left her out there to die. The Mojave in July is a place that doesn't forgive. The air itself feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Out in Ridge Rest, the sun splits old wood and blinds horses that run too long. It's the kind of heat that makes you question if you're still alive or just waiting to be finished off. Jack Mercer knew that kind of waiting. At 42, he'd seen enough of life's worst to recognize when something was wrong. He wasn't a soft man, not after burying his own brother, watching his house burn to the ground, and losing the only woman who ever called him home. But what he saw that day on the edge of his ranch was a new kind of wrong. One that makes your teeth ache and your stomach twist. She was standing by the fence post he hadn't fixed in years, barefoot, her dress soaked to the knees. Over her head, a grain sack was tied so tight it looked like it was meant to erase her face from the world. No slits for eyes, no mercy in the knot. Her wrists were bound, rope biting so deep it could shame barbed wire. And yet she didn't move. Didn't run, didn't even scream. She just stood there as if she already knew no one was coming. Have you ever seen something so wrong it makes you want to look away, but you can't? That's what Jack felt. He stepped down from his horse, not saying a word, moving slow like a man approaching the edge of a cliff he couldn't see the bottom of. The girl's voice was barely a whisper, so dry it cracked in the middle of the word. Please take them off. Not loud, not desperate, just empty. Like those words were the last thing she had left. Jack's hands were rough from years of fence posts and firewood, but he worked at the knot with a patience that only comes from surviving too much. Whoever tied that sack did it with hate. It took 3 whole minutes to undo, each second stretching out like a lifetime. When the sack finally dropped, what he saw wasn't a curse or a monster. It was 19 years of someone else's cruelty, written in bruises and silence. Jack didn't ask her name, didn't ask where she came from or what hell she'd been through. He just helped her up onto his horse, gentle as he could, and rode slow back to the cabin. The ride was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that feels awkward. It was the silence of 2 people who both knew what it meant to see too much and say too little. Back at the ranch, Jack poured her a tin cup of water. She drank it like it hurt, but she didn't spill a drop. He boiled a potato, left her the bigger half. Didn't say why, didn't need to. She sat near the fire, wrapped in one of his old blankets, not speaking for nearly 20 minutes. Jack didn't push. Out here, pushing never helped anyone open up. Not in a place where secrets are as common as dust. Finally, she looked at him, her voice soft and almost lost in the crackle of the fire. They said if a man looked too long, he'd get cursed. Jack didn't blink. Doesn't sound like a curse. Sounds like cowards. She managed a small, crooked smile. It wasn't much, but it was something. That night, the wind outside rattled the windows. But inside, the silence was different. It was the kind that settles in when 2 people realize they're both still standing, even after everything. Jack didn't know what would come next. He didn't know if she'd stay or run, or if the people who left her out there would come looking. But for that moment, there was a fragile peace, one that felt like it could break at any second. But for now, it held. And as the fire burned low, Jack watched her drift into a restless sleep. The old blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. He wondered what kind of world could do this to someone, and what kind of man he'd have to be to make sure it never happened again. Out in the Mojave, under a sky full of stars that didn't care who lived or died, Jack Mercer made a silent promise. Whatever storm was coming, he'd stand between her and the worst of it. But as the night deepened and the wind howled, Jack knew one thing for sure: this was only the beginning. And in Ridge Rest, beginnings were never simple. Whispers in Ridge Rest. Morning in Ridge Rest doesn't come with a gentle sunrise. It arrives with a slap of heat and the sound of wind scraping dust against the windows. Jack woke to the familiar ache in his bones, the kind that never really leaves a man who's worked the land too long. But this morning something was different. The girl, he still didn't know her name, wasn't curled up by the fire. Instead, she was outside, hanging his shirts on the line, moving slow but steady, as if she'd always belonged there. She wasn't asking to stay, but she wasn't asking to leave either. There was a quiet determination in the way she moved, a stubbornness that said she'd survived worse than a night in a stranger's cabin. Jack watched from the porch, coffee in hand, wondering what kind of life could teach someone to be so careful and so brave at the same time. But in a town like Ridge Rest, nothing stays quiet for long. By noon, the saloon was buzzing. Stories spread faster than wildfire, and everyone had their own version. Some said she was Comanche, a runaway from a tribe that didn't forgive. Others whispered she was a witch, cursed to wander the desert until someone brave enough took her in. One old drunk even claimed she was a ghost Jack had dug up and fallen in love with, a spirit come to haunt his lonely ranch. Jack didn't care what they thought. He had fences to mend, a horse with a limp, and now a girl with rope burns who flinched every time he coughed too loud. He kept his head down, working through the day, but he could feel the weight of the town's eyes on his back. Out here, kindness was rare, and suspicion was as common as dust. People didn't like what they couldn't explain, and Jack knew it wouldn't be long before someone came looking for answers. That evening, as the sun bled out behind the hills, the quiet broke. Two men on horseback rode up the south road, their silhouettes sharp against the dying light. They didn't wave, didn't smile, just sat there, staring at the house like it owed them something. Jack stepped onto the porch, his shotgun still hanging on the rack above the door, a silent warning that he wasn't in the mood for trouble. Inside, the girl went still. Her hands shook, eyes wide and unblinking, like she recognized the scent of these men before she even saw their faces. Jack didn't know them, but he knew their type. Too clean for ranch hands, too quiet for travelers. They sat their saddles like men who thought they owned whatever they looked at, the kind who measured their worth by what they could take. The taller one tipped his hat, voice flat and cold. "Looking for a girl," he said. "Red hair. Wears a sack." Jack didn't blink. "Haven't seen her." The other one laughed, low and mean. "She limps a little. Pretty, if you can get past the silence." Inside, the girl was holding her breath, hands gripping the edge of the table like it might float her away, if she squeezed hard enough. Jack stepped down off the porch, calm as a man who's seen too much to be rattled. "She ain't here. You can ride on." The first man's eyes narrowed. "She ain't yours to keep now." That was it. Jack's voice dropped, low and steady, but it hit like thunder. "She ain't anyone's to keep. She's not cattle. She's not property. She's a person." The men didn't push further, not yet. They turned their horses and rode off, but the way they looked back told Jack everything he needed to know. They weren't done. Trouble had a way of circling back in Ridge Arrest, and Jack could feel the storm building on the horizon. That night the girl didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just sat by the fire, holding a hawk feather she'd found near the fence that morning. Funny thing about feathers, they always show up after storms, a sign that something survived. She looked at Jack, her voice barely more than a breath. "They'll come back." Jack nodded. "Maybe." The next morning she wasn't hiding. She walked the fence line in Jack's old boots, shirt tucked in like she belonged. When Jack asked if she wanted to stay, she didn't say yes. She just said, "I'm tired of running." There was a finality in her words, a quiet strength that made Jack believe she meant it. But word in Ridge Arrest moved faster than a rattler in dry brush. By sundown, everyone knew Jack had taken in a girl with rope burns and haunted eyes. Some folks whispered, some stared, but no one offered help. Out here, people watched from a distance, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. Jack didn't care. He had his own code, and it didn't leave room for cowards, or men who thought they could own another person. He kept working, kept watching, and kept the shotgun close. Because in Ridge Arrest, kindness was a risk, and Jack Mercer was about to find out just how much it could cost. But that wasn't the end of it. The real trouble was still coming, and when it arrived, it would test everything Jack thought he knew about mercy, justice, and the price of doing what's right. The return of shadows. Night in Ridge Arrest is a different kind of dark. It's not just the absence of light, it's the weight of everything left unsaid, the secrets that settle in the corners of old cabins, and the spaces between heartbeats. Jack Mercer knew that darkness well. He'd lived with it for years, letting it fill the empty rooms of his life. But now it felt different. Now it pressed in from the outside, heavy with the promise of trouble. The girl, still nameless, still silent, moved through the days with a quiet purpose. She fixed what she could, mended what was broken, and never asked for more than a place to sleep and a little food. Jack watched her, trying to piece together the story she wouldn't tell. He saw the way she flinched at sudden noises, the way her eyes darted to the door whenever a horse passed on the road. She was always listening, always waiting for the sound of hooves that meant her past had caught up. Jack tried to give her space, tried to let her heal in her own time. But the world outside wasn't so patient. In Ridge Arrest, rumors grew like weeds. The saloon talk had turned mean, twisting her story into something ugly. Some said she was cursed, that anyone who helped her would suffer the same fate. Others claimed she was a thief, running from a crime too terrible to name. Jack ignored them all. He'd seen enough to know that the truth was rarely as simple as the stories people told. But even Jack couldn't ignore the feeling that something was coming. The air was thick with it, a tension that made the horses restless and the dogs bark at shadows. He started sleeping with the shotgun closer, listening for footsteps in the night. The girl slept lightly, never fully at ease, her dreams haunted by things she wouldn't speak of. On the third night, the trouble finally arrived. Not 2 men this time, but 4. They came without lanterns, without greetings, just the slow, deliberate sound of hooves crunching gravel in the dark. Jack heard them before they reached the gate. Years of sleeping with one ear open had taught him to recognize the rhythm of danger. He stepped outside, shotgun in hand, but not raised. He didn't need to threaten, not yet. The leader, the same tall man from before, dismounted first. Grant Teller. That name had drifted through border towns for years, always attached to stories of girls gone missing. Cards marked, whiskey debts unpaid. Grant spit in the dirt, his eyes cold and empty. "She belongs to the man who paid," he said, voice flat as a gravestone. Jack didn't flinch. "She's not property." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Grant stepped forward, his boots kicking up dust. "She's a curse inside." The girl heard every word, but this time she didn't hide. She didn't curl up in the corner or shrink behind Jack's shadow. She opened the door, barefoot, wrapped in Jack's old quilt, her eyes steady and unafraid. "You afraid of me?" she asked, her voice clear and sharp as broken glass. The other men shifted, confused by her defiance. Grant took a half step back before catching himself. The girl's gaze didn't waver. "You beat me," she said. "You sold me. You left me in the dirt, said I'd bring ruin. But look who's shaking now." Jack raised the shotgun, his movements calm as sunrise. "You'll ride out now," he said, voice low but unyielding. "And if I see you near this ranch again, you won't ride out at all." The threat was quiet, but it carried the weight of a man who'd lost too much to bluff. The men didn't argue. They didn't threaten. They just turned their horses and disappeared into the dark, the sound of their retreat swallowed by the night. When they were gone, the girl sat on the porch, not crying, just breathing like someone who hadn't in a long time. Jack sat beside her, silent, letting the quiet settle between them. There was nothing to say. Some wounds don't heal with words, and some victories are measured only by the fact that you're still standing when the sun comes up. After that night, the ranch changed. The fear that had haunted the corners of the cabin faded, replaced by a different kind of quiet, the kind you earn, the kind that settles in when storms pass and nothing breaks anymore. The girl didn't hide. She didn't flinch. She walked the fence lines at dawn like she owned the sun, her steps sure and steady. Jack watched her, not as a protector, but as a witness to something rare, the slow, stubborn return of hope. But Ridge Arrest wasn't done with them yet. The town still whispered, still watched, waiting for the next chapter in a story they didn't understand. Jack knew better than to trust in peace. Out here, the past had a way of finding you, no matter how far you ran. And as the days grew longer and the shadows stretched across the land, he wondered what price they'd have to pay for a little kindness, and whether it would be enough to keep the darkness at bay. But that's the thing about the West. It never lets you forget where you came from, or what you're running from. And for Jack Mercer and the girl with no name, the hardest part of their story was still waiting just beyond the horizon. Quiet after the storm. After the men rode off into the darkness, the ranch settled into a silence that felt earned, not forced. It was the kind of quiet that comes only after a storm, when the world holds its breath and waits to see what's left standing. Jack and the girl sat on the porch, side by side, the night air cool against their skin. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say, not after what they'd faced together. Sometimes the deepest understanding is found in silence. The next morning, the sun rose over Ridge Arrest with a gentleness that felt almost out of place. The girl was already up, walking the fence line in Jack's old boots, her hair loose and wild in the breeze. She moved with a new confidence, as if the night had burned away some invisible weight she'd been carrying. Jack watched her from the window, a mug of coffee warming his hands, and felt something shift inside him. A cautious hope, fragile but real. Life on the ranch returned to its slow, steady rhythm. Jack fixed the broken fence post, the one where he'd first found her. The girl helped, her hands steady as she held the boards in place. They worked in companionable silence, the kind that grows, between people who have seen each other at their worst and chosen to stay anyway. Jack didn't ask questions and the girl didn't offer answers. Out here, survival was enough, but the world outside their small sanctuary hadn't forgotten. In town, the whispers continued, softer now but still present. Some folks watched the ranch with suspicion, others with a grudging respect. A few even started to wave when they passed by. A small gesture that meant more than words. The saloon talk shifted too. The stories grew less wild, less cruel. People began to see the girl not as a curse or a ghost, but as someone who'd survived something terrible and come out the other side. Inside the cabin, the girl began to settle in. She found small ways to make the place her own. Planting herbs, near the cottonwood tree, mending old shirts, sweeping dust from corners Jack hadn't noticed in years. She sang sometimes, soft and low, when she thought no one was listening. Jack pretended not to hear, but the sound lingered in the air long after she'd finished. One afternoon, a wagon creaked up the trail, slow and tired. Jack watched from the porch as a woman stepped down. Her dress faded, shoes cracked, a child asleep in her arms. The girl froze, her eyes wide with recognition. The woman approached, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was with you back in Texas before they split us." The girl didn't cry. She just helped the woman down, cradled the child, and led them inside. That night, the cabin was fuller than it had ever been. Jack opened the barn door, pointed to the loft. "There's room," he said, and that was that. No questions, no explanations, just a quiet acceptance that sometimes the only family you have is the one you choose. The days grew longer, the work a little easier with more hands. The new woman stitched quilts out of canvas and old shirts. The girl taught the child to sort nails by size, their laughter drifting through the open windows. Jack found himself smiling more, the lines on his face softening as the weight he'd carried for years began to lift. By spring, the town's whispers had faded to a murmur. Some folks dropped off canned peaches, others left fresh bread on the porch. No one asked questions. The girl never wore the sack again. One day she pulled it from the drawer, walked to the edge of the pasture, and hung it from the fence. She let the wind take it, didn't chase it, didn't look back. Jack watched her, pride and sorrow mingling in his chest. He knew the world could still be cruel, that danger might return. But for now there was peace, a hard-won, precious thing. The girl walked the fence lines at dawn, her steps sure and steady. And Jack knew he was witnessing something rare, the slow, stubborn healing of a soul. But even as the ranch found its rhythm, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the past wasn't done with them yet. Out here, peace was always temporary, a brief pause before the next storm. Still, he held on to hope, believing that maybe, just maybe, kindness could outlast the darkness. And as the sun set over Ridgerest, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Jack sat on the porch, the girl beside him, and listened to the quiet. It was the sound of survival, of second chances, and of stories not yet finished.